Hello, and welcome to Remember the Film, the podcast where this week we take the red pill, stay in Wonderland, and find just how deep the rabbit hole goes. We are, of course, talking about the Matrix trilogy this week. Whoa. Yeah, and joining me as usual are my co-hosts Grizz.
Hello.
And Josh.
Why, oh, why didn't I take the blue pill?
This. I know the Matrix is telling me that this steak is so juicy and moist. So, how you guys doing today?
Doing great.
I'm doing pretty good, man. Until you did your Joe Pantoliano impression, I was doing better. But
I know that was bad. I didn't try an impression. I was just saying mine.
Ignorance is bliss.
Ignorance is bliss. Sometimes, I guess. So this week, similarly to our Godfather episode, our actual film to remember, so the one that we're going to go a little more in depth about, maybe in the plot, and rank with the other films to remember that we had up until now, is The Matrix Reloaded. So since it's the second movie in the series, we decided to go through the series as it was released. So we're going to be talking about The Matrix, then The Matrix Reloaded, and then finally Revolutions as well.
And why are we talking about The Matrix, Hugo?
We're talking about The Matrix because, of course, we said that the next 3 episodes after our 2021 most anticipated show would be related to what our personal most anticipated movie for the year was. So I'm really excited about The Matrix 4. I can't wait for that movie. I hope it comes out with movies already being delayed, but whatever. So for that reason, we're talking about The Matrix trilogy. Where do we start? Shall we start with some just facts? But just like some basic facts about The Matrix.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure people, know about this, but I think there's some interesting stuff to talk about. So The Matrix, of course, was released in 1999. It was only the second feature film made by the Wachowskis. And it was a smash hit. So the studio gave them around 60 million in budget, and it made 463 million worldwide. So it was just a massive hit, and then it would eventually spawn sequels. There's comic books about the Matrix, there's video games about the Matrix, and all sorts of stuff. It's interesting that this was their second movie because they actually they first worked with Warner Brothers, the Wachowskis, on the movie Assassins, which they didn't direct, but they were writers on that. And so Warner Brothers asked them, do you have any other interesting scripts? And so they had 2 scripts, which were Bound, which was the actual movie that they would make as their first movie, and The Matrix. The studio, of course, didn't trust them to direct this massive science fiction film that on paper they could actually barely understand. And so they first did Bound. Of course, Bound was a critical success. I think it debuted at Cannes. I'm not entirely sure, but it was a critical success. The studio liked it. And
regardless of how good Bound was, it's wild that a studio would just give to these untested directors $60 million for this high concept.
And the thing is, they actually didn't right from the start.
Right.
They had greenlit the movie, but there was still some discussion of what the overall budget would be. So the budget that they initially had, they actually used it to shoot that initial sequence with Trinity, which is one of the best sequences in the movie, with Trinity escaping from the agents, and then the final thing they shot was that scene with the truck destroying the phone booth, where she disappears inside and gets out of the Matrix and escapes. The story goes that they shot that scene, they edited it, they added special effects to it, and then showed it to the studio. And at that point, the studio were like, "Oh, these guys really know what they're doing. They're doing something really interesting." And so they approved. The budget had already been approved; it was lower. So at that point, they increased it, and it went to 60 million. Which, to be fair, for a movie like this, is not that much money.
You wouldn't make this for less than 150 nowadays, I would think.
No,
a movie this effects heavy.
It would definitely have an MCU level budget.
Oh yeah, definitely. But the thing is, it was very difficult for them to explain what they were doing with this film, because if you only read the script, there's a lot of concepts that are quite difficult to understand. There's this idea of doing kung fu style fights from Hong Kong movies that hadn't really been done in the West in the way that this movie did. So there was a lot of unknowns with this film. So what they did this scene, and then they hired a storyboard artist, and they storyboarded the whole movie, like all of it. And if you look at the documentary, it's really interesting because you can see they followed the storyboards almost to the letter for most scenes, especially the action sequences. And that's how they sort of got the approval from the studio to actually do the movie. But still, they had to go to Australia. They were shooting in this like worn down warehouse, and like, you know, they did it under difficult conditions. But I don't know what do you want me to ask? How do you guys feel about The Matrix? I guess,
well,
you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, so The Matrix. I like The Matrix. It's obviously it's a cinematic achievement in a lot of the, and we'll definitely talk more about that, but just the way that they filmed it, certainly specific scenes, they invented new camera techniques to shoot some of this stuff. So awesome achievement in that regard. And the story is very interesting. It has an appropriate level of philosophical nature to it that I think, you know, adds to the film. So all around, I enjoy it. What about you, Josh?
I really enjoy it. Yeah, I think it's this movie is, I think, as good as its reputation, to be honest, which is saying something. Grizz, you mentioned it has an appropriate level of philosophical stuff. I think that, like, my barometer for what an appropriate level of philosophical stuff in an action movie is The Matrix. Like, I only know that this level of philosophy works because it works in this movie, you know? I think that my big takeaway on The Matrix is how much it kind of captured lightning in a bottle and, like, probably couldn't be replicated today. Like, I mean, we all have high hopes for Matrix 4 and everything, but, like, you know, like I said earlier, the fact that the studio gave them $16 million to these directors that only made one movie so far about, you know, a story that they kind of didn't really understand. That's remarkable. That wouldn't happen today. Also, like, the way this movie was marketed, like, Hugo, you may be too young to remember, but Grizz,
I am, but I know.
Like, I was 9 in 1999 when this came out, but, like, I still remember, like, the ad campaigns of this movie really took advantage of the fact that they were in the early stages of the internet.
Yeah.
Like, this was one of the first, like, this and Blair Witch Project in the same year were, like, the first two movies that I can remember to, like, use the internet in their advertising, really to their advantage. I remember on the poster, the tagline being, you know, what is The Matrix? I think they had, like, a website, like, whatisthematrix.com or something like that. And, like,
I think they also used the line from the film when Morpheus says nobody can be told what the Matrix is.
Yeah.
I think they used that line in the trailers, and they showed some action sequences, but they didn't really give away the hook of the film.
Right. And I think they really built intrigue in a way that is really impossible now with the way the internet is now. And, like, again, like, this and Blair Witch, and to an extent Sixth Sense, also the same year, like, those are all time capsules of how you can market a movie back then and build hype for it. You can't now. And, like, I remember being 9 years old and, like, being aware of this movie, even though it was like an R-rated movie that I would not see for several years. I was still, like, very curious about it at you know, in the fourth grade or whatever. And I mean, again, I'm kind of talking about circumstantial stuff, but I think the movie itself is awesome and it really works. And it's just, you know, it's a cool time capsule of 1999.
Yeah, and those circumstances are important to think about in terms of where this movie stands in the history of cinema. So,
yes,
you know, I totally think that's worth bringing up. That it's not it was breaking ground not only in the filmmaking but also in the advertising. It's part of what makes it a cultural icon.
For sure.
Yeah, and it was also one of the first real examples in the West of actors going through extensive, like, months of training to learn the choreographies, to do the stunts themselves, to achieve what they could achieve. Because if you look at this film, and maybe we take this for granted today, but if you look at this film and the way the camera doesn't really cut that often during action scenes, it moves around the actors and you can always see their faces. That seems like something that we could take for granted, because today they can enhance that by using CGI. So some of the shots are the real actors, some of them are not, even though they look the same. But at the time, action movies didn't used to look like this, especially in the West.
And I love when, like, obviously they use a lot of wires for the
Yes.
jumping around and stuff, which I that works on me a
Yeah,
lot.
it's
I love
awesome.
that. I love that stuff. But also, like, when two characters will jump on the wire, the camera will move with them and jump up with them. So even though the actors like move jumping up 10 feet, they're staying in the same place in the frame. And like, I don't know, like that stylization, like, again, really works on me. Just the hand-to-hand fights, the fast hand-to-hand fights. I realize that that's like borrowing from every kung fu movie ever made, but again, it works for me. I really like watching those fights a lot. So
the
They're
floating
awesome.
nature of the movements in that not just works well visually, but it also works well in terms of the universe. And I think that's that combines is what makes it so special. That they're doing things that normal people can't do because they're aware that they can do those things, and that's what allows them to be floaty and everything. It makes it's just very cool.
Honestly, I think that might be like the big legacy of the Matrix for me is like it's not like a novel philosophical idea to think like, what if we're in a simulation? Like, that's not like a new thing at all. In fact, I remember taking a philosophy class in college. Grizz, we had to take philosophy classes at our college. And one of them, I can't remember which philosopher it was, but he, said, what if we were all just like brains in jars, and like everything we're experiencing is just an illusion? Like, and that's a guy from like the 1600s, 1500s. So again,
I know what you're talking about.
That's not a new idea. The idea of like the Matrix, and even Elon Musk thinks that we're living in a simulation now. Which Elon,
Philip K. Dick. Easy for a guy with that much money to think we're in a simulation.
I'm very happy for you, Elon. I wish you the best. But yeah, like.
Yeah, that guy says a lot of stuff, though, to be fair.
But you walk out of the Matrix, you walk out of seeing the Matrix in theaters, and you walk out in the world, and you're like, man, you look at your hand, and you're like, is this real? And like, that idea, like, is interesting to think about. It's fun to think about. And I think that we'll talk about the sequels and whether they do or don't work as well. But I think that like one advantage that the Matrix has over the sequels is that that's like a fun concept to think about, and like that's kind of just like a given in the sequels, and not like the premise as it is in the original. And I think it so the sequels kind of lose a little bit because it doesn't have that fun novelty of that idea.
Yeah, and I agree that what's cool about it is the idea isn't new. It's the idea of you go back to the saying, "I think, therefore I am." It means Descartes, I know that I exist because I think, but beyond that, I can't trust my senses I can't be sure that my senses actually work, that what I'm living is actually real. I can only know that I exist because I can think it.
You think that's air you're breathing right now?
The idea is really ancient. What happened?
I said, you think that's air you're breathing right now, which is what says to me.
Sorry, the internet cut out of me.
Yeah, I got you.
So the idea is really old, and it's a classic philosophical conundrum. But I think what's genius about the Matrix is they're able to put that to screen in a way that makes sense, that makes it understandable for anyone, that maybe even people who hadn't thought about this stuff at all before, maybe people who don't know philosophy at all. It makes it understandable, and it adds on top of that this like really insane cyberpunk comic booky story that can be enjoyed just on the basic action film level. So I don't know. Yeah, it's so many different things click together to make something that just works.
One thing that stands out to me throughout the entire series, through all three movies, and in the Animatrix as well, is when the fight scenes have an almost anime quality to them.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think that this is one of the first times that a live-action movie was able to achieve that level of combat, so that's what makes this franchise actually the most interesting to me, more so than even the story, is that those action sequences are so like, I can't believe that this is on screen, and they hold up so well.
They do,
and it's because most of it was done practically.
Yeah, I was gonna say a lot of it's in camera. Like, that's also why I think $60 million maybe not like insane, but like the budget would be a lot higher now because they wouldn't do all that stuff practically. They would, pay for it.
I mean, it depends. yeah, it depends who's working on this, because there are movies that do, like the John Wick movies, for example, just which is another franchise starring Keanu. But the John Wick movies do most of what they do in camera, and there's sort of a legacy that comes from The Matrix, because Chad Stahelski is the director of the John Wick trilogy, was the stunt coordinator on the Matrix sequels.
Was
and
he really?
Okay. He was, yeah, and he was he was Keanu Reeves' stuntman on The Matrix. So yeah,
full circle.
Yeah, it's really cool. But yeah, another thing that I wanted to bring up about this film is sort of a more recent rethinking and reinterpretation of the film that has made certain sectors of the internet very angry with it. Which is that the first film in the trilogy is sort of can be viewed as a metaphor or as an allegory for gender dysphoria. Obviously, the Wachowskis, both of them are trans women, directed this film, and there are a lot of elements within the film that seen through the lens of, as I think Lily Wachowski said this in a speech that she gave. That a lot of their work is being reevaluated through the lens of their transness. And if you look back on this film, you can see, okay, the red pill itself, the concept of the red pill itself, in the 90s, the estrogen pill that you would get when you were, going through a transition was a red pill.
I didn't know that.
The character of Switch, which is the blonde character that's in the movie. She's called Switch because initially she was supposed to switch genders when she went into the Matrix. Because in the Matrix, what Morpheus explains to Neo, that in the Matrix, you appear to yourself as your true self. You see the actual image of yourself that you have in your mind. So the idea was that she was going to switch genders because she was actually trans. Of course, the studio at the time wasn't ready for that, and so they had to drop that element, but it is something that they had written into the script.
Even so, Switch is like an androgynous looking character as is,
If you think about it, a lot of the characters are quite androgynous. Even the way Keanu is shot, his lips are always quite bright red. He's pale. Trinity isn't a traditional feminine character.
Some masculine qualities in Trinity. Yeah, for sure.
They certainly play with gender roles in the film. Like even the fact that Trinity is the one kissing him to wake him back up. He is Sleeping Beauty in the film. It's an interesting bit of imagery.
It's almost they did what they could. Like you said,
they did.
The studio wasn't ready for them to
exactly
do that
to make it explicit.
They put in the stuff that they could. That's actually really cool. Yeah. That it adds some levels that we're still picking up on today.
Yeah, and I think the most important element of this sort of interpretation is that Neo himself is described in the film as he knows there's something wrong. He knows that his life, there is something not right, but he can't pinpoint what it is. And then once he finds out, once he realizes, he takes the red pill and he takes a chosen name, and all of the people around him, his friends, and the woman that she's going to fall in love, always call him by his chosen name. He's never referred to as Thomas Anderson again,
except by Smith,
the agents.
Except by Smith, yes. Who is essentially dead naming him.
Exactly.
And the big pivotal scene where he fights back against Smith, and Smith is like, "Oh, you hear that, Mr. Anderson? This is the sound of inevitability." And the big scene of him fighting back against that is, "My name is Neo." It's reaffirming his new identity, his new name. So in that sense, it can be interpreted as an allegory for gender dysphoria and having a chosen name, etc., etc. So yeah, so I always find it a bit odd that the concept of the red pill has been and of the film has been adopted by certain sectors of the internet who very much sectors. Misinterpreted what this movie was and what this movie was about in many ways. it makes it it makes them even stupider that you might think they are.
You're really not paying attention, are you guys?
Yeah, really not. I don't think you understand this film. And I'm expecting Matrix 4 to possibly make that original allegory a bit more explicit and to anger a lot of fans. Like, I think it's going to be a, sort of Last Jedi situation where there's a part of the fandom that is going to get angry for the wrong reasons. And there's people who don't like the Last Jedi for legitimate reasons, and there are criticisms that can be had of that movie and of other movies that have had backlash. Of course, I'm not making a broad assumption, but there are some people who got mad at it because there's females in positions of power, and I think those kinds of people are going to get mad about the Matrix 4 because I think Lana Wachowski is going to make that allegory. I'm not going to say explicit, but it's going to be a recognizable element of the film much more than it was for the original.
Well, yeah, I mean, if they had to like kind of be clever about hiding that kind of stuff in the original because the studio felt a certain way about that message, I'm willing to bet it's going to be the studio feels a little differently about it now, 20 years later. So maybe more explicit. So, I agree with that.
It's going to be interesting to see what they do with that side of the concept, I guess. The Matrix. What do we need to add to it? It's one of the great action movies of the 20th century, I think.
Real quick, one of the other notes that you had on here in our outline was that Will Smith turned down the role of Neo to do Wild Wild West, and that is hilarious.
He did. That's crazy. And I think he published a video on his YouTube channel because Will Smith has become a famous YouTuber right now, which is weird. It's a weird thing to say, but whatever. He published this video.
Relevant, man.
Yeah, you do. I guess he could decide to make good movies instead, but whatever. He made this video where he talks about his meeting that he had with the Wachowskis, where they had real trouble explaining to him what the movie was, and he turned it down because he thought, "Oh, this is crazy. This isn't going to work. Like, there's no way this is going to be a good movie." And so he was like, "I don't understand it. I don't know what you're talking about." And so it's cool. Like, your guys are interesting, but
I can understand that decision on his part.
Oh yeah.
But the other thing I want to touch on is that you say Keanu is perfect for this role in our notes.
I think he's awesome in this film.
How do you feel about that, Josh?
I feel differently about it now in 2021 than I may have like at some point in the early 2000s. I think that there's been a reassessment of Keanu Reeves as a whole in the last few years.
For sure, because I remember in the early 2000s, it was a thing to make fun of Keanu Reeves in this
100%. 100%, yeah.
It was everywhere. People were making like, I know Kung Fu,
Well, I know Kung Fu. Yeah, like I still do. Like, I'm not above that. But yeah,
but it's intentional. That what I feel about it is overacted sometimes, but everyone is heightened in this film. Do you see the way Morpheus talks?
I thought that he was very reserved in this role. Like he's not. All of his lines are very reserved, level, very monotone. And
I think it's by design. Like there's an emotionlessness as a stylistic choice in this.
Absolutely.
And like, I mean, we're about to talk about Reloaded. I think that's why Reloaded has to begin with like this extended party sex scene, because like there's no emotion in these characters for the first movie that we saw them in. So we need to like Reloaded relies on Trinity and Neo's relationship, so you have to buy into their relationship, and like they're so emotionless in the first one that like you need that long sex scene at the start of the second one.
And honestly, that's the part that I can least enjoy in the first Matrix is the love story, because I don't feel like it was developed.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it was developed fine, but like as I said, I think like the emotionlessness as a style like kind of hinders any kind of love story. It's always going to hinder that. But to your point, Hugo, I think that Morpheus is also speaking a certain way, and like, but Keanu Reeves kind of was always in this mode in the 90s to some extent.
Yes, I agree.
No disrespect to the guy, like I love Point Break, I love Speed. Like, by the way, that's an amazing 1990s action movie, Keanu's triple feature. If you watch Point Break, Speed, and The Matrix, that's a goddamn Saturday right there. Shout out to our guy. But yeah, like to Grizz's point, like there has been like a reassessment of Keanu Reeves in the last 5-10 years, which like I'm on board with. I always, I like liking things. I like liking Keanu Reeves more than I like making fun of Keanu Reeves.
Agreed.
But he was certainly made fun of a lot for this role in particular. Yes.
I have two things on that. I say he's perfect for this role because it is true that he's not an actor that has a lot of emotional range. I think that's pretty obvious by
That's
the
fair.
movies he made. But he's a very good physical actor.
Yeah.
I think the way he moves, the way he acts to camera is really good. So for an action movie of this style, you needed a committed lead that was going to go through the training, that was going to get this right. And I think he at that, he's great. He's great in this, he's great in John Wick.
Agreed.
And also, second thing about the emotionless thing, I think it's really interesting that in these movies, the character that shows the most emotion is actually the Oracle, which isn't a human character. And I think that's not unintentional, even though I don't feel like the overall message is delivered perfectly. But there is an undercurrent in the films that, actually, the machines aren't this monolithic evil AI. There's infighting. There's certain machines and certain programs that don't want the war to continue and that are trying to understand human emotion and that learn from human emotion. And I think that's the role of the Oracle. And so I think it's really interesting that she's the one that has, she's the one that cracks a joke,
range.
that has a smile, that gets really sad in certain scenes and has emotional range. It's kind of a cool touch.
I think Tank has some emotional range in the first one too.
Agreed.
That's fair.
Which makes me think like he can't plug in because he was born in Zion. I wonder if the plug is like a barrier of like emotionality or something like that, and because he doesn't have one, he doesn't have that barrier. I don't know. I'm making stuff up right now, but
it could be like there's something to be said.
He was the most
for
emotional out of that whole group. So
he was. Yeah,
there is something to be said about the trauma that these characters must be feeling about, waking up and finding out that your whole world doesn't exist and you're being used as a battery by some machines. Like, it's not unfair to think, they're detached for a reason,
Mm-hmm.
But still, it is a stylistic choice. So we're reading into it a lot. Shall we move on to our... It is what we do. It is. And I really enjoy doing it. So, yeah. Do we want to move on to our film to remember?
Yeah, I think now's a good time to
Matrix
do that.
Reloaded.
I also just realized I never put up the screenshot from The Matrix the whole time.
Way to go, tech guy.
One job.
You have multiple jobs in your defense.
Okay, well, there's the screenshot imagine that screenshot was up the whole time, everybody. Okay,
I can't see it anyway. So
give it a few more seconds. Okay, now you can switch. Matrix Reloaded. Okay, so Matrix Reloaded. Interestingly, the sequels to the Matrix, which I think is a really odd choice, and I think it is one of the reasons why they don't feel as great and as satisfying as the first one is that they were filmed back to back. They were almost filmed and structured as if they were one movie. They were released 100%. In the same year.
Mm-hmm.
With it's kind of, I think the Reloaded came out in summer and Revolutions came out November,
May, November-ish, I think.
Like May, November, maybe. Like that.
Yeah.
And
something
the
like that.
Animatrix
Yeah, in
came out in between them.
And the Animatrix,
really?
the DVD was released, in between. So, it was a whole year for the Matrix. And I think the video game Enter the Matrix came out in 2003 as well. So, a lot of Matrix. But anyway, this movie was made for, we don't know exactly what the budget was because they were filmed back to back, but speculation is that it's around 150 million, so the budget was increased considerably for the sequels. And for a long time, this film was the highest grossing R-rated film of all time. It made 739 million worldwide. And that's a record that stood up until I think it was Deadpool that beat it in 2016. So
The Hangover might have beat it.
No. It was Deadpool.
Wow.
I just couldn't remember the year, but it was Deadpool that beat it out as the highest grossing. So people obviously were excited to see this film, and as we know, the reception for it wasn't quite as overwhelmingly positive.
Wasn't as glowing,
as it was for the first film. A lot of people felt like this was bloated and kind of disappointing, and that it undercut some parts of the first film.
I think bloated is a fair
bloated
criticism.
Is one of the fair criticisms. I agree. I personally kind of love this movie. So I think what it does with the ideas of the first film and how it kind of subverts them in many ways is makes the original Matrix even more interesting for me. But I know that's not the most common take on this film. So how do you guys feel about it?
I enjoy it. I did not enjoy it as much as the first one, for sure.
Mhm.
But I also enjoyed it more than I was expecting to. This week was actually the first time I had watched The Matrix Reloaded or Revolutions. So I was going in fresh. And yeah, I was expecting to dislike it more because of what I had heard about it, but for sure it's still a fun movie, really cool action. Which, if that's the thing that you like from The Matrix, then you still got that. It's still really good.
Yeah.
So,
I like this too. I guess I like it more than I remember liking it a little bit, but also I think that the criticisms levied against it are pretty fair.
pretty fair.
And I think that, so I saw this around the time it came out. I saw both Matrix sequels around the time they came out. Then I saw both Matrix sequels again in college as part of a philosophy class. And then I saw both sequels again this week. So like my viewings are like 8 or 9 years apart. And when I watched them in college, like I had only remembered like a few set pieces from the first time I watched them. And then when I watched them this week, I had only remembered a few set pieces from the time I watched them in college. So my takeaway from that is that, like, I think that Reloaded is like it's the first fight with the many Mr. Smiths. It's the highway scene.
Yes.
And it's the conversation with the architect. And like those are the three like big parts of Reloaded, and like everything beyond that feels a little bit like filler. Or, you know, maybe not filler, but like as you said, Hugo, you can kind of take the sequels as like one long 4.5 hour movie, because like there is stuff in Reloaded that doesn't really pay off till Revolutions, and so like and it ends on a cliffhanger. So like, there is like a bit of an arc within Reloaded, but it's really part of an overall arc with Reloaded and Revolutions, and I think it's good. It's just I think that it's kind of set piece based, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's like it's a long movie to have to be kind of boiled down to 3 set pieces.
Right. Okay. So I'll explain what it is about that I sort of that clicks with me for some reason.
Yeah. I want to hear.
Because the first Matrix is very much about it's very much the hero's journey, right? It's structured around that. You have the mentor, you have the character literally. Yeah, you have the character literally crossing the threshold and taking the first steps in the new world. Like, it's as literal as you can get with it, really.
There's a literal resurrection as well.
There is a resurrection. Like, it's very much. I guess Morpheus doesn't die. Doesn't the hero's journey include like the mentor figure dying at some point?
Not necessarily. I mean, I realize that's how they do. That's how they do it in Star Wars, but
that's how they do it in Star Wars.
I mean, he comes close to dying. They have to like rescue him.
He does. He does. He is in trouble, and the main character has to choose whether he wants to risk his life to save him, or like it's very much structured around that. What I don't like about that the storytelling of the first film is the idea of the prophecy. I never really gravitate towards when a story says, "Oh, it's prophesized. He's the chosen one, therefore he's going to do that. That's the reason why." Okay, so we already know what's going to happen. What this film does is tell us that actually there have already been 6 versions of the Matrix. The one is just a glitch. It's because of the fact that in the past they had built the Matrix to be sort of heaven on earth, but the human brain couldn't accept that. The human brain is wired to understand that there is conflict, that there is good and bad, and so they had to reintroduce the element of choice. So this idea that even subconsciously the human brain needs to have some semblance of choice to accept its reality. If it's too perfect, it doesn't believe in it, and so they couldn't use them as batteries, essentially. And they flip it. They say, "Oh, it's not. The prophecy is just to get you here. It's just to get you here so you can reboot the Matrix. But actually, there's already been 6 of you, and Zion is going to be destroyed. You're not going to save everyone. We are just going to restart this cycle." Because we can't get this pesky glitch out of the mathematical perfection of what the Matrix is. And I kind of love that.
have
I
a
really
question
enjoy the
for
fact that he isn't the chosen one. He it's his choices that eventually lead to the conclusion that we get in Revolutions. Because if it wasn't for his choices, then the cycle would have just repeated itself in the same way that it had done in the past.
So,
Okay, go ahead, Grizz.
the question. So is he a glitch or
Yes.
is he on purpose? If
I
they
think,
need
like,
him to
the-
reset,
yeah,
if they need him to
I know-
reset the Matrix, then he had to have been on purpose. But they call
Based on, like,
call him a glitch.
based on the architect's
They're not.
explanation, I think it's like a kind of a planned glitch. Like, you know, they design it a certain way such that like all these equations balance out, and he calls them a remainder. So like
Yeah.
they know that they have to design it such that there's a remainder at the end of their equations, and that remainder is Neo. So like it's a eventuality, I guess, of the way they're designing the Matrix. We're getting into technical stuff that probably doesn't really need to be discussed.
Yeah,
but it is.
it doesn't, but it
fundamental
kinda
to
does,
My
like-
understanding of this movie, you know.
I
That's
think
why I was
what
curious
the
about
architect says is because they had to reintroduce this element of choice, this caused a glitch in the balance of the matrix that eventually created this anomaly, which is what he is called. He's the anomaly. He's essentially, he has a connection to the machine mainframe, which is, you could say, the computer that is running the program of the matrix. And because he has this connection, it's inevitable that at some point somebody will be born that has this connection to the mainframe, so is able to modify the matrix from the inside and do all the incredible stuff that Neo is capable of doing.
Yeah.
And what they need for that him is because he gets to the machine mainframe, he meets the architect, and they need him to reboot the matrix in order for humankind to survive within the matrix. Because otherwise, he would just be a destructive force for the matrix, and that's shown in Smith. Because Smith is theoretically, there's the big speech that the Merovingian gives, action reaction. So if Neo is born and he's sort of the powerful force for good, Smith represents the powerful force for bad. That it's the equation trying to balance itself out. Okay,
Right.
So if he doesn't reboot the Matrix at that point, Smith is going to destroy it.
Another
Okay.
question.
That's the idea. I know,
Sorry, Josh, you wanna
and
go
it's
ahead?
heady and weird, but it is what they're trying to do, I think.
My question is, though, that Agent Smith says that Neo freed him, right? So
Yes.
Neo created his ability to do this. So
Yes.
how is that the equation balancing itself if Neo's the one that made that happen?
Because, I mean, it's action reaction. Because Neo exists and has that power, he destroys Smith, and by destroying him, Smith says, "Oh, but the fact that you entered me to destroy me caused me to become self-aware and to not want to." Because what they say is the programs, when they get destroyed, they have to go back to the source and basically be deleted. He gave him self-awareness enough to not want to be destroyed, and he gave him part of his powers. It's sort of the opposite.
Okay, so this is
It
a
is-
problem for me.
Yeah.
Because Neo didn't have to destroy him by going into him.
And that's
So-
completely fair.
So like that, the whole rest of the trilogy is based off that one moment in the Matrix
I
where
feel-
he flies into him. Everything else
Well, that's-
spirals out of
I-
that. That's coincidence.
I don't think that's going. It might be, but I feel like it's more. The idea is more that regardless of what he had done, he would have created the opposite force of him. It's just that it happened to
It
be
happened to
that
be Agent
situation.
Smith.
Yeah, it just happened to be him. And Agent Smith was already,
He was already kind of a
different
wild card.
from-
yeah.
right. Okay, he was already
He-
different from the other agents in a way.
Sure,
so-
and they
The way
showed
that the way he talks to Morpheus about like hating the Matrix and wanting to get out, he was already
Yeah.
like, and he took the sunglasses off, and I think he maybe
Yeah.
took out his earpiece too. But like,
yeah, he did take out the earpiece.
I think any method by which Neo destroyed Smith, whether he
Exactly.
went into him or not, I think Smith still would have like
Yeah.
not gone back to the source and still would have become a rogue program regardless.
Yeah,
Okay, but
That's the basic.
yeah,
That's the gist.
at least that's how it appeared. They appeared to imply that it was his entering him that gave him that extra level of sentient ability, that he takes
Right.
advantage of. But we had shown that you could kill agents. You could kill agents just by shooting them, as they
In
did
theory,
many,
yes.
many, many
Although it
times.
hadn't been done before, yes.
Yeah, they showed. I mean, they showed him do that. We see that in the sequels as well. That lots of the agents they die and they don't come back when they get shot. So
because they destroy the program essentially.
So it's like, boy, Neo, really wish you hadn't flown into that guy because you could have avoided.
But again, I feel like it's the same. It's as Josh said, he was already different from the other agents. So it's sort of the idea of balancing itself out within the equation is that they would eventually come to fight against each other, and Neo would kill him because he had the power of the one, but then by consequence Smith would become the sort of his counterpoint.
But he only got those abilities to duplicate himself and all that after Neo flew through him.
Yes, but I don't think it's the flying through him. I think it's just the fact that he destroys him and it gives him self-awareness.
Awakens he's like, I could have been doing this the whole time. Okay, I
exactly. I think that's. But I understand that the mechanic. It is an issue with the sequels that they are at the same time over-explained because there's a lot of exposition, and under-explained because the exposition is so heady that you have to kind of.
Like, I need more time with
you. You have to almost read a transcript of it to fully understand what they're actually saying in the film, because every conversation is philosophy, and so it is a lot.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you enjoy these movies for the reason you just listed, Hugo. I think that conceptually that conversation with the architect is interesting, and conceptually what they do with Neo is interesting, but it just there's a lot of stuff outside of that concept in the sequels that I question whether or not is the best execution of that concept.
I don't think it is either, by the way.
So, and you also mentioned that the exposition. I think one of the big strengths of the Matrix that kind of is lost in the Matrix sequels is that the original Matrix is a pretty contained story. Like it all takes place either in our world, which is the Matrix, or it takes place on the Nebuchadnezzar. So it's those are a familiar place to the audience, and then a small ship that's unfamiliar, but it's a manageable thing for us to keep in our mind. And it suggests a larger world. They mention Zion, they mention this human city, they mention this war with the machines, but they don't actually show it. It's just an allusion to it. And then the sequels kind of have no place to go except to show that larger world. So instead of the suggestion of the larger world, they have to depict Zion and the people and the war. And I don't know, for me, the actual depiction of all that stuff is less interesting than the suggestion of all that stuff. And so so I don't blame them. They had they planted those seeds in the original. They kind of played their own hand and had to do that in the sequels. But I don't know, and as mentioned, the sequels kind of work as one long movie. So Matrix Reloaded takes a while to get going. If you want to talk about if you want to talk about act breaks, the first act is 45 minutes long. He doesn't. That's when he sees the Oracle, and she basically gives him his mission. You got to go see the French dude and get the keymaker and all that stuff. But everything before that, the 45 minutes before that is just
Zion,
a party. Him and Trinity have sex. He has a conversation with his old dude in front of the machines about machines controlling them and us controlling machines, and a lot of chess pieces about the coming war. But it's a war we don't see until Revolution. So there's I don't know. It takes a while to get going, And
I feel like these I like Reloaded and I like Revolutions less because I feel like both movies have they're the same but the opposite. I think the first 45 minutes of this film are the weakest, and then it gets interesting and good. I think the action is really good in Reloaded, especially.
Yes.
Then Revolutions has, I think, in my opinion, a strong first 45 minutes where they're going to look for Neo, they're going to the Merovingian, and then it just devolves in endless action sequences within Zion that don't look very interesting. They don't look really interesting. They're gray on gray CGI against gray CGI, and you can't really see what's going on. It's not that good. So that's the reason why I think the execution of the third one especially sort of lets down what they're trying to do, for sure.
So basically the last 55 minutes of, we'll talk about Revolutions in a minute, but the last 55 minutes of Revolutions is more or less two extended action sequences, one in Zion, one in the Matrix. Yeah. And if you take the two sequels as one big whole, that's basically like the third act of the two movies. Is that 55-minute sequence? And yeah, it's pretty mind-numbing for my taste, particularly the Zion scenes. The Smith scene I like, but the Zion one not so much.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do a thing. Let's rank this film, because I think talking about Revolution without talking about Reloaded is impossible. So we're going to be talking about Revolutions and Reloaded together.
Okay.
So let's say
I still have more things to say about Reloaded, but we can do it after the rank.
Yeah, we'll absolutely do that. But let's rank it so we can include Revolutions in the conversation a bit more. Okay, so as usual, for our film to remember this week, which was Reloaded, Matrix Reloaded, we rank it on our film to remember list. And as I said, I'm really biased towards these films. I have to be completely fair and say I watched them. You remember the story about Kill Bill? I watched them with my dad when I was 9 years old, and I loved them at the time. And it's part of I can't divorce myself completely from that. And there are reasons why I like them, and I recognize the faults. But it's very hard for me to rank these movies. So I think you guys should just say where you guys think it should go on the list. I'll remind you of the list. So number 1, we have Citizen Kane. Number 2, we have The Thing. Number 3, It's a Wonderful Life. 4, Ma Rainey. 5, Rudy. 6, Mank. 7, Jackie Brown. 8, Iron Man 3. 9, Sugarland Express. And 10, The Godfather Part 3, Coda Reloaded Revolutions.
I have it either just in front of or just behind Iron Man 3. It's one of those two.
Mm-hmm.
I would place it behind Sugarland Express.
You really like Sugarland Express, don't you? You're always advocating.
I do really enjoy Sugarland Express.
I think I'm going to lock in between Jackie Brown and Iron Man 3 for me. So in the 8th slot.
And I think for me, I think to be completely fair, I would put it there as well, below Jackie Brown. And even though I would rather watch this movie than most movies on our list, just for nostalgia and personal taste, but being a bit more
because you voted higher, it would go there.
Well, hold on, like me and Hugo both say above Iron Man 3, but you say below Sugarland Express. So does it average out to like just below Iron Man 3?
No, maybe? I think it's you vote until
you vote until it goes, yeah.
Until you no longer have a majority of votes.
Oh, okay.
Right, because you would say who thinks it's better than Sugarland Express, and it would be me and you. And who thinks it's better than Iron Man, it would be me and you. So,
well, I'm very tepid about putting it above Iron Man. I would just as quickly put it behind Iron Man, but whatever. We can put it above Iron Man.
I don't mind it. It's the same.
This is meaningless. Let me reiterate. This is pointless.
It really is.
And I hate this
exercise. Really is. Okay, let's resume our conversation. We'll talk a bit more about Revolutions, Reloaded and Revolutions together, because I think it's really hard to talk about them separately from each other. Even though I think Reloaded is executed better, and I think especially the action is a lot better in Reloaded because it's a bit more focused and it's less just mindless and confusing than Revolutions. But
so speaking of confusing,
I
was talking with Josh about this.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I was missing something. Like it all felt like it was trying to be more intellectual than it is.
Right. Okay.
And so, like it kept making me feel like I had missed something. And obviously, I have missed things in movies, and I have missed things in this movie. But I felt like it was trying to no, this is really heady stuff, guys. Like, I felt like that's what it was telling me the whole time, and I'm like, I think I get what you're saying, but I really don't think it's that highfalutin.
The way the Frenchman and the architect talk, they're both very frustrating in the way they their vocabulary and the way they speak. Very frustrating.
And they are frustrating, but I think that's kind of intentional. I think Neo and Trinity and Morpheus are supposed to be annoyed by this character who's just philosophizing, and they agree with him. There's a scene in the third film, Revolutions, when they go meet the Frenchman, and the Frenchman starts going on another spiel about action, reaction, causality, and all that crap. And Trinity says, "I don't have time for that crap," and starts kicking ass and points a gun at him. That I think, in that sense, it's kind of intentional that they talk like that, and because they are programs, they are AIs, and who don't give a shit about human emotion, and that's why they feel so different in the way they talk and in the way they act from the Oracle, for example, who
intentionally annoying is still annoying, though, is the thing.
It is still annoying, and I completely agree with that. I do think they could have worked like you don't need to have two people who talk like that. You know what I mean? I think the architect within the context of the film kind of works. Adding the Merovingian on top of that, even though I kind of like the Merovingian because he's weird and funny, but it's still
and he's
like
European.
He is European. He is European. That's important. Even though the actor is, I think the actor is British. So yeah, he's doing this weird French accent just because he says he likes. Yeah, but the best part of that is obviously Italian. How do you say Italian pride? Monica Bellucci on the film. She's awesome always. Yeah,
that's the pride.
I think
the pride of Italy is Monica Bellucci.
The pride of it. Yeah, that's it. We don't have much. We don't have much going on. That's it. Monica Bellucci. That's it.
Really,
Joe Pantoliano.
Joe Pantoliano.
And Joe,
yeah.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
The reason I wanted to bring up the philosophy
again
is I really want Josh to say what he put in our outline. I want him to say it on camera.
Okay. I think that the first Matrix is like taking an introductory philosophy class, and the sequels are like having a conversation with an insufferable dude who just took an introductory philosophy class.
And that is 100% how I feel.
Tap myself in the back for that take. I think that's a good take, yeah.
That is, words have yet to be spoken on this podcast.
And to some extent, like it or not, that's kind of what the Wachowskis do. If you've seen a lot of their work, it's always
Cloud Atlas rules. Cloud Atlas is awesome.
Yeah, I liked Cloud Atlas.
But yeah, I like most of what they do. Most of their work I really like. But they are very in your face, and they're not subtle filmmakers. They'll tell you what they mean in their film. I think The Matrix, the first one, is surprisingly subtle compared to the rest of their filmography.
And that's their best one. So
yeah. It is, but they are kind of the Kojima of. I don't know. I know Josh might not get this reference, but they are kind of the Kojima of movies. Kojima is like a famous video game director, Hideo Kojima, and his stories are filled with exposition. They tell you what they mean. They tell you what the ideas are constantly. But at the same time, at least to me, it's quite endearing, and I kind of like it, and it works in the context of the stories that they are telling.
To me, it's insufferably philosophical.
And I kind of enjoy it, you know. Go ahead, Josh.
You just said that the original one is the most subtle. What I think the original has over the sequels is that it's the most grounded. Like the first half hour, the first third of the original takes place like in the world that the audience lives in, and like Neo has a desk job and he hates his boss, and he that kind of stuff. Like that's all relatable stuff, and then it we experience we're with Neo as he experiences the awakening and crossing a threshold and that kind of stuff. Yeah, he's an audience POV person for us to experience that new world with him and everything, and like I said, like it's kind of a smaller scale story of like it either takes place in the world the audience recognizes or on a small ship that we can kind of wrap our heads around. And Reloaded and Revolutions are not grounded in the real world. They're grounded in Zion. And like anytime they go into the world that the audience recognizes, there's like a big layer of facade, because like we all know by this point that none of this is real. There's a big green tint on everything. They're doing stuff that none of us can do and that kind of thing. And so like I think the grounding is like a big part of why audiences were easily receptive to The Matrix, but maybe less receptive to the sequels, I think.
Yeah. And yeah, I completely agree with that. The sequels turn into anime in many ways. So,
sure.
Yeah. In those action sequences, I love that. I love those.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it's because the grounded stuff doesn't deliver anymore. And so then I latch myself onto the part that I do enjoy and can relate to because of my experiences with anime and things like that. That's the part that clicks with me the most now. Whereas before, like Josh said, I could click with Neo because he was just a guy and with similar life experiences. And then a computer takes away his mouth and everything goes off the rails.
And
goes up his belly button.
Yeah, and the relatable characters in the sequels end up being, the Oracle and sometimes Trinity, but not even really, or Niobe. It's never him. He's so much. He's always larger than life.
Well,
he's less relatable in many ways.
But I do like that the sequels kind of give you like a, okay, you're a god, now what kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like he wakes up. Reloaded opens with him waking up from a dream and just like kind of questioning his purpose. Like there's a lot of talk about purpose and you know, not just from Neo, but also from the Oracle, from Smith, from Morpheus. Like they all are talking about purpose the entire Reloaded movie. Yeah.
Finish your point. I mean, yes, I completely agree with that. And I think the criticisms that we are giving of this movie, of these movies, are all completely fair. The reason why I like it is because I think the overall concept and the overall story works, even though the execution could have been so much better. Because I think these two sequels, you could tell the same story and make it like brilliant science fiction in a way that they're not, because they're so in your face with what they mean and the exposition, and you know, they're constantly talking about, like in Reloaded and Revolutions, they're always going on about control. It's always determinism against choice, but they're always saying the words, like they're saying, oh, control, do we control the machines or do the machines control it? It's like every conversation in the films is concept
on the nose.
It's ideas. It's never there's never a character. I mean, there are a few character building moments between Neo and Trinity, I think, that are quite good, but they're very few and far between. Did I get that wrong? You know what I mean? So I think you could execute the same story and make something great with it, and I still enjoy it as a story, even though the execution is a bit spotty.
Yeah, and I want to agree with you on that. The bones of this franchise are good. It has good foundation, good structure. It's everything that comes off of it where they kind of, you know, fall apart. There's a lot of wasted time in both Reloaded and Revolutions. And talking about Revolutions, I swear to God, the captain is still on the bridge shooting sentinels right now since 2003. That scene is still going on.
Yeah, that's a long scene.
It just goes on, and then all the stuff with Link, and you know, and Z. You know, it's interesting and could have been developed into something cool, but you know, I really just wanted Tank. Why did Tank have to go away?
I miss Tank. Yeah. Well, and also like I don't think like the length of the action scene is necessarily the problem. Like the highway scene in Reloaded, from the time that the Merovingian says, "Get the keymaker" to the twin dudes. To the end of that sequence, like
minutes.
I think it's an 18-minute sequence is what I had on my watch. 18 minutes, and like that's a great 18-minute sequence. I have no complaints about that sequence. Yeah, but like that's brilliant
action.
Yes, but like the fight for Zion and Revolutions has got to be north of 20 minutes, I would think, just because like again the last 55 minutes of the movie is basically that Zion fight and then Neo fighting Smith. So like that Zion fight has to be about 20 minutes long, and I can't tell you anything about it. Like, I mean, I remember from watching it in 2003 and from watching it in college, I remember the kid like taking over for Captain Mifune, and that's like kind of it. That's all I really remember from that fight, and that's a 60, 90-second beat in a 20-minute fight sequence. So
yeah, the part I like about that sequence is what is not in that sequence, and it's the scene of Niobe piloting the ship through the tunnels and getting back to Zion. I think that's pretty good. But the actual scene, of the battle goes on forever. It feels like it's like an hour and a half long, and you kind of
can't really,
and you don't really
can't
care.
really see what's going on necessarily, like
because it's grey CGI against grey CGI.
It's like watching a Transformers fight.
Mm-hmm.
It really is, unfortunately. And I think also
that's my problem with those movies, to be perfectly honest. Like, you can't tell the clarity of exactly.
And I think what another big problem with it is the editing, because I think the editing of the action sequences in Reloaded and in the first one is spotless. Like when the highway chase is sort of intercut with Neo fighting against the goons of the Merovingian and all that stuff, it just works the way that it's structured. In the third movie, at some point, Neo and Trinity have fought off real-world Smith, and they're going towards a machine city, and they disappear from the movie for half an hour.
They do. Yeah, that's rough. That's really rough.
And I feel like if they had cut back and forth between these two scenes, like the scene of them going to the machine city, which is sort of a calmer scene because they go over the fields. I think there's some really cool ideas there, and they could have cut back and forth to build tension, and it only feels like, oh, this happens and then this happens, where in fact they're happening at the same time. So why not cut between them? You know.
So I have a theory about that. I was thinking about that this morning. So the machines stop fighting in Zion once Neo enters the Matrix to like take care of Agent Smith rather. But before that happens, Neo has like a moment of calm where he talks to Trinity as she's dying. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking about like the Zion scene kind of like resets itself. Like they fight in Zion for like 20 minutes. Niobe comes in, blasts the EMP, and then there's like a moment of calm, and then the machines breach a second time, and then they're about to fight again, but Neo goes into the Matrix. They don't fight.
Yeah.
If they compress that a little bit, then, you know, Neo going into the Matrix is what makes the, you know, machine stop fighting. If he has that like quiet moment with Trinity before he goes in the Matrix, then like Zion people are dying that entire time that he's like sitting there mourning Trinity, taking his time to go talk to the big machine guy. So like I think they kind of had to like extend that sequence out such that both Zion's having a moment of calm the same time that Neo is having that moment of calm with Trinity. Otherwise, we're gonna be like, dude, Neo, I get it, she's dead. That sucks. But go talk to the dude because they're dying right now. They're dying right now. Go. But
I think that makes sense, but it's only a small part of it. It's like it's the 20 minutes before that is the problem for me, you know? Yeah.
I mean, I completely agree. That sequence could have been 5 minutes instead of 20, and it would have been about as good to me.
I would.
Yeah, no, it would have been better probably because you could have staged it better. You could have thought maybe a little better how to tell this overall battle in a smaller amount of time to make it clearer.
It feels like they felt like they had to make the battle long.
I agree.
They stretch it out. And how bad, I would be remiss if I didn't say, how bad are these machines at combat? Like, stop all flying directly into the guns. There's a billion of you, spread out.
Yes.
Swarm them. They can't shoot all at once. If you keep funneling straight into it, of course you're going to blow up.
Yeah. And again, like, that's kind of like a problem I have with the series overall, the sequels overall, is number one, they're both more overt war movies than the first one. The first one's not a war movie at all, but the second 2 and 3 are. But like, that Reloaded has a very long first act, largely because it's setting up chess pieces for like the war battle scenes and revolutions. Like we meet the kid and we meet Mifune, both in Reloaded, even though they have fuck all to do until revolutions. Yeah. And, you know, and like setting up the chess pieces with like Locke and Niobe and like the council and all that stuff, like that's all just setting up for the war stuff in Revolutions. And it's just like, it drags down Reloaded. That action scene that's the payoff of all that stuff drags down Revolutions. And I think that, you know, in the original Matrix, there was a suggestion of all these things instead of the depiction of all these things. And it was like better when it was a suggestion for me personally.
And my thing with this is, again, I think the overall story is quite good, and what they should have done, in my opinion, is not make the sequels back to back, not film them together, not release them together, make 2 films.
Yeah,
because you can tell once
if they had forced themselves to find an ending for Reloaded and find a new beginning.
And I don't mind it. Yeah, and I don't mind it ending with a cliffhanger if we know it's a trilogy. That's fine. The problem is you're setting up stuff in the first half of Reloaded that doesn't pay off until the back half of Revolutions. So these films can only exist if you release them close to each other, because otherwise they just don't work by themselves. And if they hadn't done that, if they made, let's say in 2003 they made Reloaded, and in 2005 or whatever they made Revolutions, I think it would have forced them to rethink the way these scripts were structured and to find creative solutions to make them more streamlined and to make them stand up separately as 2 different films, entries in a series, but still different.
They may have been better standalone. They may have been better standalone movies had they been further separated in their production and release.
Yeah, and I think
like the Star Wars movies.
Stories, and I think it would have made the overall story better as well.
Which, you know, if we can kind of shift into Matrix 4, maybe that's a promising sign that, you know, they're making this sequel 17, 18 years later. So, you know, maybe it will be more of a standalone thing, and hopefully not like the start of the next Matrix trilogy. I mean, I don't know. If they make another Matrix trilogy, fine, but like I'd like just a good movie, a standalone movie.
I'm doubtful that they would do that, because I think if this movie is good, then in 3 to 5 years, we might see something else. If it works, if it's a hit. But I think the way they're making this movie, and I read some interviews with Lana saying we're just making a movie, and we'll see what happens. But they haven't revealed much yet, so we'll see what actually happens when it comes out.
What cast do they have announced for Matrix 4?
They have Neo, Keanu Reeves. Carrie-Anne Moss is coming back, which is interesting because
that's
dies.
Interesting. Okay. Well, so does Neo dies too, but
Neo is questionable because it's like he seems to die, but then Sati.
The Oracle does say we might see him again.
I think we are. The Oracle says I think we will.
Is Morpheus in 4?
Morpheus is not. Morpheus is not in 4.
Observation: Morpheus does absolutely nothing in Matrix Revolutions. Like he's important in Reloaded. He has absolutely nothing to do in Revolutions at all.
Can we talk about?
Yeah.
I have another thing about Revolutions. Why does Trinity die? What's the purpose? And because I feel like if she was alive and she was there as Neo was sort of killing Smith and brokering the peace that he eventually gets with the machines, because they get to a point where, okay, we have peace now. We don't know if it's going to last, but there's peace in this war. We've sort of balanced each other out. And what if Trinity was alive and the machine and the final scene was Trinity coming back to Zion and the machines are escorting her sort of as a token of peace, and the final scene is her embracing Morpheus they shed a tear or whatever because Neo has died, or at least they think he's died. Like I think that could have been cool.
That's interesting. I think that
death doesn't really serve any purpose in the plot other than having a dramatic moment at that time.
I think that it makes Neo more willing to give his own life to save Zion. I mean, like the Reloaded
would have been stronger if Trinity was still alive.
I agree, but like in Reloaded, he does like the conversation with the architect. The climax of that movie is him making the active choice to save Trinity instead of save humanity. So like that, I feel like if Trinity's still alive and he chooses to give his life to save humanity, that kind of like undoes the choice at the end of Reloaded in some sense.
But not necessarily, because I don't think what he's trying to do is, oh no, I don't believe you. I don't believe that I don't have a choice, and I'm going to save Trinity. And I'm going to save everyone as well, which is what he does. And that's the difference between this cycle of the Matrix and the past cycles of the Matrix. I think what's different is the Oracle is introduced. She sort of sets up all the players to eventually reach a peace. Like the final conversation the Oracle has with the architect, he says, "Oh, you played a dangerous game," meaning she sort of made a gamble that these people would make the right choices that would eventually lead to a peace. I think her role is what changes this cycle of the Matrix compared to the previous cycles. Yeah. So I do think it would have still worked, but whatever.
I don't think she needed to die. I don't think she needed to die, and
exactly.
But I also don't think that it hurt that she died. Like I don't.
No, it's not a big deal, but it's something that I always. It's something that I always.
Yeah.
Like,
which is not great.
Which is not great in its own way. Yeah.
But yeah, I think we've talked about this extensively. I don't know if you guys have any more thoughts, if you have speculation about what Matrix 4 could be. If Grizz, you want to say something about the Animatrix.
I watched that. I'm a big animation fan, so I was very excited for it. I think that Animatrix kind of mirrors the franchise in that they made decisions based on aesthetic that I do not think necessarily helped in any of the shorts. Like they chose art styles that are very unique, and sometimes that made them very hard to look at, and that is a problem in animation. But the other biggest problem is that almost nothing that happens in the Animatrix has anything really to tie in with the actual movie.
I think the only short that is actually interesting is the Second Renaissance.
Yeah, the Second Renaissance gives you backstory. That's cool, and then also the kid that Neo saved. His origin story is in that, and it turns out he's actually pretty cool. And they could have done. They could have done some cool stuff with him, but they didn't.
Yeah. He's kind of just there. The Second Renaissance sets up this idea that sort of the machines aren't, and AI isn't necessarily evil. They acted out of survival because it was the humans that didn't accept the existence of AI, and therefore they scorched the sky and started the war, and then the machines sort of reacted. And
It was
and
cool.
there's
The Second Renaissance was cool.
I think there's
everything else.
yeah, and I think there's this underlying idea that the machines are acting out of sort of a sense of utilitarianism rather than like straight up evil. They're acting without
they're computers.
intention. Yeah, they're acting just in order to survive.
Their goal is to execute their primary function, right?
Exactly.
That's how the artificial intelligence. That's one of those constant tropes. So like, yeah, I mean, it is kind of cool that they kind of set it up in the Second Renaissance short.
Yeah.
That the machines aren't inherently evil, but because of the actions of humans, it makes them do things that we would perceive as evil. And,
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It was kind of interesting, but like overall, you definitely don't need to watch the Animatrix to appreciate.
I haven't.
To appreciate that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of cool if you like this franchise and you like the aesthetic. But other than that, it's not like important or anything.
That's my Animatrix thoughts.
Yeah. Any ideas on the Matrix 4? Because I genuinely have no idea what they're going to do, and I'm excited for it because I don't know
how they can do
and
this movie. Like, I don't know
exactly, which makes me think that if they are doing it, they must have a cool idea.
I mean, I think the obvious thing is to have like a torch passing of sorts, where like maybe there's like a new Neo that Keanu Reeves can mentor or train. Maybe he's the mentor now. Maybe he's the Morpheus figure, and there's a new person. I don't know, because I think that like going back to the well of like the original Matrix makes more sense than going back to the well of the Matrix sequels, because like as we've discussed, I think the original works a lot more. So like I think if you can kind of rework that story instead of reworking the Zion stuff, like I don't know, that seems like a better idea to me. I don't know.
We'll see what it is. I
think
genuinely have no idea.
The only story I can see that would have value from my perspective, and then maybe they'll surprise me with something, but would be a story about the humans and the machines learning to live together.
Yeah,
a buddy comedy, The Odd Couple with a jellyfish and a human. Yeah.
Yeah, but something along those lines, and obviously there would be people that oppose that. So maybe there's some story where there's humans fighting with machines against other machines, or
I'm picturing like a human living with an agent in like a roommate scenario. Coming this fall to CBS, The Matrix 4.
They have the one guy who's a silly goofball, and then the rigidly strict computer.
Yeah, Felix and Oscar.
Yep,
exactly
Felix
right.
and Oscar, 100%. But yeah, so that's the kind of story I can see happening with Matrix 4, and I would be interested.
Yeah,
to see
I wonder. I really don't know. I really have no idea, and I'm excited. I hope they do trailers in the same way that they did for the first film, and they don't give away.
You can't anymore, though. Is the thing. You can't do that anymore.
But I think they can, because I think they can to some extent because it's them, and you don't get like look at their movies. They're all completely wild, and they're huge swings, and they don't play by the rules, I think. But I mean, maybe they will. Maybe it will be just a big franchise movie, and we'll have no creative, interesting ideas. But I hope not. That's it. So, Josh, what are we doing next week?
Next week, our film to remember is a little movie called Boogie Nights. Boogie Nights. Written and directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, starring Marky Mark of the Funky Bunch. And I'm very excited.
Yeah.
Woo woo. I don't know if is it on HBO Max? Maybe for those looking to watch it. I don't know. I have a Blu-ray. I have a shiny new Blu-ray. That's how I'm watching it. I'm very excited.
Awesome. And then we'll be talking about Paul Thomas Anderson, I suppose, in the main topic.
Yeah.
I mean, I would love to do that. Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
So,
that's exciting.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and comment, and all that jazz. And if
5 stars.
If you're mad that we didn't talk about particular characters, particular scenes, there's a lot to talk about. So sorry.
Yeah, it's big.
Yeah. All the mouse stands can @ Grizz on Twitter and give him your mouse takes.
Yes.
And what about what's he called? Dozer? No. What is he called?
Dozer.
Yeah,
Dozer's so
Dozer.
cool.
Yeah.
Dozer.
Yeah. All your Dozer takes, send them @ Hugo on Twitter.
Yes. @ Hugo. Yes, that is my @. I managed to have Hugo, the exclusive. Yeah.
I'm
That's
at
me.
Good Game Grizz on Twitter. If you really do want to
Oh.
talk movies, you can tweet.
Speaking of which, I didn't say this. Hugo Weaving is amazing in these movies.
He's
Last
awesome.
thing.
Oh, why
Last
didn't
thing
we
I'll
talk
say.
about that? Oh,
Yes.
he's so cool.
Speaking
he's
of
good.
at Hugo, Hugo
amazing.
Weaving is the Hugo, and he is having the time of his life
Yes.
making these, and he
Having
makes
it
a meal. He makes a meal of every line he delivers, and he's
Oh, it's so
awesome
good.
in these. And his
Let's
evil laugh after he makes the Oracle one of him is an all-time evil cackle. And I put Hugo Weaving at the center of the frame in Matrix 4. Please be in Matrix 4, Hugo Weaving.
Yes. He's also confirmed not to be in it, but yeah.
That cackle
I'm
made
out,
me
I'm out.
uncomfortable.
I'm out.
He's so creepy, but
creepy,
he's
no-
also
man.
I'm no longer seeing Matrix 4 unless Hugo Weaving
There's no
shows up.
Hugo Weaving. Ah, shit. Maybe he will. I mean, they might not be announcing stuff. I don't know.
A cameo.
All right. I think we jacked
Thanks,
into the
everyone.
Matrix enough. Bye, everyone.
Bye.